This is Jerry Allen interviewing Vanalyne Green at Otis College of Art and Design on February 25th, 2011. Welcome.
Thank you. I signed up for sculpture class with Judy Garowitz. And I was living with my boyfriend. I remember the first class, Judy said she she came to California to get 2,000 miles away from her mother. And I thought, this is the woman for me. You know, because I was studying psychology, dissecting rats, doing all kinds of sort of lab experiments. And then here was somebody who was talking about emotions, really, you know, and like the mother-daughter relationship. And I went home and I told my partner, you know, I'm going to drop the other class, I'm going to take this one. And so I took that sculpture class, and I think it was midterm that Judy changed her name from Garowitz to Chicago, or something like that, something around then. And, you know, we didn't really hit it off. There were things that she wanted me to do that just seemed more outrageous than I could do. There were people coming through, there were artists who were there, and there was going to be this romp, this performance art romp in the hills. And in other words, I was kind of posing as the kind of like, oh yeah, I can do this, but I really couldn't do this because, you know, it was really like, it was just too new for me in a way. The Feminist Art program launched the year after, and Judy went through a series of interviews with potential people, women, for this program. And I asked to be interviewed, and I think she had the feeling, rightfully so, that I was not going to be terribly productive. You know, that I wanted to be loved, I wanted to be nurtured. You know, I wanted a mother, the good mother. But at the same time, but I think she wanted people who were more productive. But I think she thought I was kind of smart, and so she accepted me to the program, but she said it was going to be really difficult for me. Judy did call it personality reconstruction. And she did talk at some point about how she couldn't have gotten away with anything like that anyplace else. But, you know, kind of like in this kind of like outback kind of place, and when people were kind of naive, she felt like she could do something that she couldn't do anyplace else. And so there was consciousness raising, there was a weekly dinner, which became a kind of virtual confrontation moment, you know, where it was like every week, like one person would be the subject of the group. There was a study group where we read, you know, female authors, like Anais Nin or George Eliot or blah, blah, blah. There were performance workshops, there were critiques, there were field trips. The field trips were maybe like one of the most important things in my life. We took a field trip down to Los Angeles to the Pasadena Art Museum, which is no longer what it was then. And I really didn't understand abstract art. And she made me stand, and I asked her, I said, I don't understand this word. And so she put me in front of a Kenneth Nolan painting. And she said, just ask yourself, you know, how does it make you feel to look at the painting? How does it make you feel? And it was as if all the art critics and all the kind of rigmarole, the critical discourse about art, the, you know, art form and stuff, it just melted. And I thought, oh, well, I have a direct relationship. It was like having sex, you know, like when you're a kid and you don't know, like having sex is like something that nobody can take away from you. You experience it, no one can tell you how you experience it. It's a sensate moment. And that kind of helps you individuate or kind of grow up, like, oh my God, you know, this isn't parent land, this is my land. And that moment with the Kenneth Nolan painting and the chevrons, it was like, you know, I thought, I get it. You know, I get art. It was great, life-changing. You know, I think the cheerleaders, the Cunt cheerleaders, was a vehicle inspired maybe by Judy or Faith or whatever to kind of give a form to women who felt pretty lost. So Sue Bowd was a Cunt cheerleader, Kay Lang, and I think Dory, right? Dory Atlantis, yeah. Now Dory, I don't know if Dory felt lost because she was, you know, she had a pretty active presence as a photographer, but there was some sense of, you know, in and out. And this is something that's come up before, and I mentioned it to Gail Levin. There was, at the middle of the program, the end of the first semester, we were divided into winners and losers, literally, winners and losers. And I was in the loser group.
And what did that mean? What was the purpose of dividing you into winners and losers?
I think it was kind of culling. I think Judy was saying, okay, you can hang on if you want to, but I'm not going to show your work to gallerists. I'm not going to cultivate you, you know, and I think she was trying to get rid of us. But we didn't want to really, and I think that was an opportunistic moment for me, in the sense that if I was really rejecting Judy, why didn't I just leave the program? Sue Valentine did. But in a way, I wanted to hang on to her coattails because I thought, well, this, you know, maybe this is a ticket out of Fresno, or, you know, she represented something that was an opportunity for me to have another life. Suzanne Lacey made it possible, she liaised for me to make it possible for me to go in the design program and work with Sheila de Bretteville. And there was consciousness raising, there were much more sort of applied problem sets, like, you know, learning to use a letterpress, you know, doing a poster. And for me, it was I was in pieces after Judy's program, but also it was kind of like she was holding us. You know, she gave me problem sets having to do with color, looking at Joseph Albert's work. And it was great, you know, because I couldn't really do much more than that. And I just thought, if you just keep going to things, it's great. You know, just don't stop going to things, because, you know, eventually you'll find your community. So I would just go to things. I remember going to a performance where Kim Jones smeared shit all over his body and then asked people to hug him. You know, and Paul McCarthy pieces and Suzanne Lacey pieces, and, you know, as long as you just kept going to things, you became part of the fabric of that community. The feminist artworks were Laura Click, Nancy Angelo, Candace Compton, and Sherry Galkey. Yeah. We did Heaven or Hell in a variety of different locations, which is to say we staged these moments in cafeterias and women's programs where, you know, there'd be the long forks and we would act out, you know, heaven, and then we would act out hell, which is to say in hell people starve to death because they're trying to force the food and they can't get it in their mouths. Whereas in heaven people are across the table from each other, feeding each other across the table. So we did that in a way as a kind of tableau vivant, and then asking people to enter the tableau vivant and perform those roles. The motivation for This Ain't No Heavy Breathing was the context of violence against women and the need to intervene, interrupt in loud ways and everyday ways this problem with violence being directed toward women. And heavy breathing, which is to say, you know, a man calls up and just breathes heavily into the phone. Or, gosh, I can remember things that my friends told me happened to them. And there was a sense of, you know, your private space could be violated at any time without you, having no control. So this ain't no heavy breathing. And there was a kind of language in the feminist art community for interrupting and intervening against the prevailing sense of violence against women. And so this piece took place within the context of a body of work that was being generated around various kinds of violence against women. And in this quotidian way of just calling women up and saying, you know, we're not a heavy breather, you know, we don't wish you ill will, we just want to find out how you are today. That these miraculous things happened. Especially, maybe they couldn't be appreciated then, but now they have such resonance. Because there was, again, as I said, there was this kind of dollop of sincerity that feminist art workers was administering, was giving. And then in return they got back, in many cases, gratitude. And not just gratitude, but a coming forth, you know, with discussion. We started as a performance art group, or an art group, and then we moved into education. But those two things weren't separate from each other. So, and I remember at one point somebody came to the Women's Building, and consultant, and sort of analyzed or evaluated how the Women's Building worked, and said they'd never quite seen an organization like that before that was so non-hierarchical. And I remember along those lines teaching a performance art class with Candace Compton. And in addition to giving problem sets and assignments for the students, at the end of the term we did a performance. And in the performance, Candace put on brown paint all over her body and I put on white paint. And we touched each other until the colors weren't distinct, until we were the same color. And that to me was a kind of metaphor for this kind of merging of and performing as both teachers and as equals in the context of the classroom. And I think a lot of those things never really got the kind of written recognition that they deserved, and the analytical recognition that they deserved. And for sure, I think a lot that has absolutely influenced my pedagogy. And Judy also. There were things, you know, the way she would kind of like, when I tried to sort of lie and say, well, no, I'm in my period, I can't do this. And there was a way in which you couldn't get away with it. But it had to do with, we're all part of this community, so if you call in and you're sick, well, someone will come and make you chicken soup. Or if your car's broken down, well, someone will come and get you. That, and I still think, and I've had a little discussion about this with Suzanne and Faith Wilding, that the fact that Judy was a child of community organizer and communist, was a red diaper baby, and Sheila also. I really believe, in spite of the fact that, say, Judy might say, well, you know, I didn't like my father, I wanted to get away from my mother, I hated, you know, the kind of Stalinist attitude that they had, that there is something about community organizing that came through in both Sheila and Judy's teaching methodology that I completely subscribe to, and try to find ways to, you know, either through mailing lists, through pairing up people, that there's a class that happens outside the class, and that's the important class. And that's, you know, that's what one has to create for learning to take place. Those kinds of things that made the women's building difficult, in the sense of how do you reach and speak to all these different and sometimes competing needs, is the very thing that was so great about the women's building. And I think that, well, I think two other thoughts. What I see as a teacher is that there is still a need for single-sex education. I still see women accommodating to men. I still see women not understanding when the universal equals masculinity and when the specific equals the feminine or the female. And like just this last week, the two guys in my class were sick, and it was an all-women's class. The whole tenor changed completely. Bubble, 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 top, gossip. It was just as if, you know, they came forward. And I thought, okay, so what, or maybe I'm coming forward, you know. That's the other thing that I was kind of thinking, what's going on with me? That do I feel that I need to sort of teach in a different way? So what I used to do, apropos of Judy and Arlene, if this is okay to talk about, is when I'd see women receding, I would start to talk about premenstrual syndrome. And just flash, you know, because when men talk about cars or whatever the hell they talk about, you know, women accommodate, they don't recede. And I thought, well, what will happen if I talk about something that's like supposedly female specific? And then I just watched the men recede. And I thought, well, isn't this interesting? There was something about the personal as political, which is like, you know, what I tell my students when I talk about that time period is like, maybe you didn't have the self-confidence to talk about who should run for governor, who should run for president. Maybe you didn't have the self-confidence, you know, to think that you could write a book, but you knew how you liked your coffee. And you could start to make work from that place, which was what I did.